So today marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing trial of the nurse Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby is standing trial accused of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital neonatal unit. She has pled not guilty to all charges. Today we hear the cross-examination in court of Lucy Letby. Mr. Johnson says Letby was a mentor to students. Letby gives details of what that would involve. Mr. Johnson asks for paperwork. What would their responsibilities be? If one of them was given a handover sheet, what would they do with it? Letby says they would dispose of it, although student nurses would not have handover sheets in the first place. Mr. Johnson asks why Letby kept bringing handover sheets home. Letby said it was a few. Mr. Johnson responds, well, 250 times it isn't. Letby replies, well, that is over many years. Mr. Johnson responds, well, even if it's 50, that's over 5 years. What is your normal practice? Letby replies, with the handover sheets, to dispose of them. They have come home with me. Mr. Johnson replies, you have taken them home. Letby responds, not with the intent of keeping them. Mr. Johnson says what would Letby's responsibilities be with sensitive data such as handover sheets? Letby replies, to keep it confidential. Mr. Johnson asks what would the hospital do in disciplinary terms if they found Letby had 250 handover sheets at her home. Letby replies, I don't know the full details. They were at my home address, but they were held in confidence. In a bag in your garage? Letby replies, I was the only one in the house. Johnson responds, and the ones in your parents' house? Letby says the parents would not have access to the box in what would have been her bedroom. Mr. Johnson replies, do you obey the rules when it suits you? Letby responds, no. Mr. Johnson asks if handover sheets were handed out to student nurses. Letby said she would have handover sheets as a student nurse at some placements, but in the neonatal unit she cannot recall specifically. She tells the court it was not standard practice at the neonatal unit to hand out handover sheets to student nurses. Mr. Johnson says one of the handover sheets, dated the 1st of June 2010, was in a keepsake box with roses on it. Letby says she cannot recall it. Mr. Johnson asks what is unusual about the handover sheet and how it differs from the others. Letby is unsure what Mr. Johnson means. Mr. Johnson replies, it is in pristine condition. Letby responds, it's the original? Mr. Johnson replies, yes. Mr. Johnson says Letby took the sheet for June 23, 2016 home as it had notes of drugs for child O and child P. Letby said there was documentation on there, but cannot be sure what details were on it. Letby said she took the note home deliberately to bring it back the following day for finishing up writing of medications. A copy of the handover sheet is circulated to the jury and Letby. Mr. Johnson says he is interested in the back on the medical notes. Letby describes what is on the note. Medication for child P, caffeine. Nothing was written for child O. No medications were noted for a third child. Letby said she had taken it back with the paper towel, which had further details. Letby is asked when the Morrison's work bag was placed under her bed. Letby says she cannot recall. The Ibiza bag became her new bag after her trip to Ibiza around June 2016. Letby is asked how the handover sheets ended up in her bag. She says after emptying her pockets, the sheets would end up in her work bag. Nicholas Johnson, you're ferrying worksheets to and from work. Letby, I can't say definitively. Nicholas Johnson, they must have been. Why put them in that bag at all? Letby, I can't recall. Nicholas Johnson, can't or won't? Lucy Letby, they were just bits of paper to me. Letby says she accepts pieces of paper were taken between different areas and properties. Quote, it's the paper I accumulate, not the content. Letby says she has difficulty throwing things away. Nicholas Johnson, is that why you bought a shredder? Lucy Letby replies, I bought a shredder for certain documents when I bought the house, predominantly bank statements. Nicholas Johnson, Why not the handover sheets? Lucy Letby: I wasn't aware I had them. I wasn't thinking, they were just bits of paper. Mr. Johnson says the shredder was bought after Letby moved into her Chester home in April 2016. Lucy Letby replies, they were insignificant. Nicholas Johnson: they are significant. They have the names of dead children on them. Lucy Letby: they have the names of lots of children on them, I agree. I shouldn't have taken them home. Mr. Johnson asks about other work documents found in Letby's Morrison's work bag, such as a blood gas record for child M. Nicholas Johnson: were they insignificant? Letby says at the time the documents were insignificant as they went home along with a lot of other documents for babies not on the indictment. Lucy Letby: these have come home with me, not with any intention. Nicholas Johnson: you have taken them home. Letby accepts the wording. Mr. Johnson asks if Letby recalls a colleague nurse's evidence for child M on the blood gas reading. Mr. Johnson says she took it, wrote it on the chart and disposed of it. Letby is asked how she got the sheet, if it had been put in the hospital's confidential waste bin. Lucy Letby: I can't recall specifically. Nicholas Johnson: it was for your little collection, wasn't it? Lucy Letby: no. Mr. Johnson asks why Letby purchased a shredder if she wasn't going to use it. Was she on so much money she could make such purchases? Letby, after saying she's not sure what finances has to do with this, she says she used the shredder to shred bank statements. Why did you lie about not having a shredder in interview? Letby said she didn't recall having a shredder. It was not a significant item in her house. Like the pieces of paper? Letby agrees. Letby, when asked how she could have disposed of handover sheets, said to police in interview she did not have a shredder, and if she did, that would be how she would dispose of confidential documents. Letby tells the court, quote, I can't recall at the time, I'd just been arrested by the police, locating a shredder wasn't on my mind. Mr. Johnson asks when the shredder was bought. Letby says, shortly before this police interview, if I said it was bought recently. Mr. Johnson asks about a shredder box in Letby's parents' home, in her bedroom wardrobe. Letby said, quote, it probably moved with me. She says she cannot recall definitively whether it was her parents' shredder. Mr. Johnson says it was settled that the box had the word keep written on it. Letby said that was to keep the box and the shredder. Mr. Johnson: but there is no shredder in the box. Letby: the shredder was elsewhere in the house. Letby agrees her parents would not go in her room at their parents' place. Mr. Johnson asks why the word keep would be written on the box in that event. Lucy Letby: I can't answer that. Mr. Johnson asks about a sympathy card written to child I's family. Letby is asked where she wrote the card. Letby says she bought the card but cannot recall where specifically she wrote it. Letby says she wouldn't have written it on shift. Letby is asked why the photo was taken when she was at work. Letby replies, the card is written, it has been taken to work to hand over to a colleague who is going to the funeral. Nicholas Johnson: why did you take a picture at the place where the child died in dreadful circumstances? Letby said the place the photo was taken was insignificant. It was taken before the card was handed over to staff. Mr. Johnson: another thing that is insignificant. Letby replies, I think that is taken out of context. Mr. Johnson: did it give you a bit of a thrill? Lucy Letby: absolutely not. Mr. Johnson says in the defence, Letby's name is not referred to in the schedule surrounding the events for some babies. Are you suggesting the absence of your name from the schedule is showing you hadn't had contact with the child? Letby agrees in terms of the documentation at that time. She agrees that does not record events such as minor nursing responses if a baby starts crying. Letby says she has been to the unit on days off, such as finishing documentation that hasn't been done in the day or seeing colleagues who have been on a course. Letby says a record would be made as the swipe data would record her entrance as the only way she could get into the unit. Mr. Johnson says for child G, Letby did not leave work until 10 AM on September the 7th. Letby replies, "That's not unusual." A message is shown from 10:56 p.m. on September the 7th. Letby, "She looks awful, doesn't she? Hope you get some sleep." Letby said if there was a sick baby on the unit, quote, "You would go and check on them, that's not unreasonable." She had looked at Child G's charts and accepts she was not on duty at that time. Letby said she had been in to finish some documentation. Mr. Johnson tells the court this was a big day for Child G, as it was her 100th day. Letby said, quote, "Yeah, she's declining bit by bit." Mr. Johnson says there is no record of Letby entering the unit. He suggests Letby does not need a pass to gain entry to the unit. Letby says she would need a pass to swipe in and accepts unless another colleague opened the door for me. Letby adds if she had a legitimate reason to enter the unit, she would have entry accepted. Letby is asked why she entered the unit at around 11 p.m, not earlier that day. Letby, "It's quieter at night. I don't know. I can't say why I've gone in at night." Mr. Johnson asks to clarify an issue relating to nasogastric tube feeds. Letby explains to the court how an NG tube feed is administered to a baby. Nicholas Johnson, "Have you ever used a plunger syringe to speed up the flow of milk?" Letby, "No." Nicholas Johnson, "Have you ever sent text to your friend while giving an NGT feed?" Letby, "No." Letby says that would be inappropriate and impractical. She says the times on the feed charts would be done to the next 15 minutes, such as for 9 a.m. that feed would be between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. Letby says she has never used her phone in a clinical area. She says the baby would take priority over texting her friends or colleagues. She says she has not texted anyone while a resuscitation is taking place on the unit, one that she was involved in. Letby said she would not provide commentary during a resuscitation. Mr. Johnson asks about staffing levels. Letby agrees that babies in room 1 are not necessarily always intensive care babies, or that babies in room 2 are always high dependency babies. Mr. Johnson says if the jury conclude a baby was attacked, then it would be the attacker who was the common link. Letby replies, "Just because I was on the shift doesn't mean I have done anything." Mr. Johnson says if the jury conclude attacks happened in 4 cases, then the common link between them all would be the attacker. Letby, "That is for them to decide." Nicholas Johnson, "On principle, do you agree?" Letby, "I don't think I can answer that." Mr. Johnson asks about Letby's colleagues. Letby says she did not have a disagreement with Dr. Gail Beach or Dr. Andrew Brunton and had a good working relationship with them. For Dr. Stephen Breary, Letby said she did not have a problem with him at the time she was at work with him. She wrote a note calling him a profanity after she was redeployed, as he and Dr. Ravi Jairam had been making comments about Letby being implicated in the deaths of babies. Quote, "They were very insistent that I be removed from the unit. Letby denies being in love with a doctor who cannot be named. Quote, I loved him as a friend, I was not in love with him." A note in Letby's handwriting is shown to the court. There is a suggestion the writing, previously said as, quote, "Timmy," is "Tiny Boy." Letby says her dog as a child had a nickname of Tiny Boy, while another of her childhood dogs was named Timmy. Letby said she had no issues with other doctors on the unit, including Dr. John Gibbs, Dr. Sally Ogden, Dr. Alison Ventress and Dr. David Harkness. For one other doctor, she said she did not have the best working relationship, but they got on. For Dr. Ravi Jairam, quote, "We had a normal working relationship." Nicholas Johnson, "You searched for him on the internet." Letby, "I searched for a lot of people." Letby says 4 doctors were in the conspiracy group, including Dr. Jairam, Dr. Gibbs and Dr. Breary, quote, "that they have apportioned blame on me." Letby is asked about failings in the hospital. Letby is asked if Child E was poisoned with insulin. Quote, "Yes, I agree that he had insulin." Do you believe that somebody gave it to him unlawfully? Yes. Do you believe that someone targeted him? No. It was a random act? Yes, I don't know where the insulin came from. Do you agree Child L was poisoned with insulin? From the blood results, yes. Do you agree that someone targeted him specifically? No, I don't know how the insulin got there. Letby adds, I don't believe any member of the staff on the unit would make a mistake in giving insulin. The judge asks if that is the case for child E. Letby agrees. She denies it was her who administered the insulin. Letby is asked about the dangers of unprescribed insulin. Letby, it would cause them to be unwell. It would cause them to be hypoglycemic, seizures, apnea, even death. Letby is asked about her training, which, when completed, allowed her to care for intensive care babies. Letby is asked if that meant she would have access to room 1 more often than before. Letby agrees. The training involved education about lines, access, and the complication of air embolus, the court hears. Letby said she had heard of air embolus by the time police interviewed her. She tells the court, all staff know that air introduced can lead to death. Nicholas Johnson, everybody knows the danger of air embolus. Lucy Letby, I can't speak for everyone. Mr. Johnson asks about the case of child A. Letby says she did have independent memory of child A. Before child A, had you ever known a child to die unexpectedly within 24 hours of birth? Letby, I can't recall. I'm not sure. Letby says she can recall 2 or 3 baby deaths prior at the Countess of Chester Hospital and several at her placement in Liverpool Women's Hospital. Mr. Johnson says Letby had previously told police it was 2 at Liverpool. Letby says her memory would have been clearer back then. Letby says it was discussed at the time child A's antiphospholipid syndrome could have been a contributing factor at the time. Letby tells the court, in part, staffing levels were a contributing part in child A's death due to a lack of fluids for 4 hours and issues with the UVC line. She says they were contributing factors and put child A at increased risk of collapse. I can't tell you how child A died, but there were contributing factors that were missed. Letby says the issues with child A's lines made him more vulnerable, with one of the lines not being connected to anything. Letby is asked why she didn't record this on the DATIX form. Letby replies, it was discussed amongst staff at the time. I didn't feel the need to do a DATIX. It had been raised verbally with 2 senior staff, 1 Dr. J-Ram and 1 senior nursing staff. She adds, I don't know why child A died. Letby says if the cause of death was established as air embolus, then it would have to come from the person connecting the fluids, which wasn't me. Nicholas Johnson, do you accept you were by child A at the time he collapsed? Letby, I accept that I was in his cot space checking equipment. Yes, I was in his close vicinity. Nicholas Johnson, could you reach out and touch him? Letby, I could touch his incubator. The incubator was closed. Nicholas Johnson, could you touch his lines? Letby, no. Letby says there's no way of knowing from the signatures who administered the medication between the 2 nurses, Letby or nurse Melanie Taylor. Dr. David Harkness recalled to the court, quote, there was a very unusual patchiness of the skin, which I have never seen before and only seen since in cases at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Letby disagrees with that skin colour description for child A. She agrees with Dr. Harkness that child A had mottling with purple and white patches. Letby says she cannot recall any blotchiness. I didn't see it. If he says he saw it, that's for him to justify. It's not something I saw. I was present and I did not see those. Dr. Ravi Jairam said child A was pale, very pale, and referred to unusual patches of discoloration. Letby, I don't agree with the description of discoloration. I agree he was pale. Letby disagrees with the description of child A being blue with pink patches flitting around. An experienced nurse of 20 years, who the court hears was a friend of Letby, said, quote, I've never seen a baby look that way before. He looked very ill. Letby agrees child A looked ill. She disagrees with the nurse's statement of the discoloration or the blotchiness on child A's skin. I agree he was white with what looked like purple markings. Letby agrees with the statement that the colouring came on very suddenly. Mr. Johnson refers to Letby's police interview in which Letby was asked to interpret what she had seen on child A. Letby explained to police mottling was blotchy red markings on the skin, like reddy purple. Child A was centrally pale. In police interview, Letby was asked about what she saw on child A. She said, "I think from memory, the mottling was more on the side the line was in. I think it was his left." Letby tells the court she felt child A was more pale than mottled. She says it was unusual for child A to be pale and to have discoloration on the side, but there was nothing unusual about the type of discoloration itself. Mr. Johnson asks about the bag being kept for testing. Letby says she cannot recall if she followed up if the bag was tested. She had handed it over to the shift leader. Letby is asked if she accepts child A did not have a normal respiratory problem. Letby agrees. Mr. Johnson asks if Letby has ever seen an arrhythmia in a neonate. Letby replies, "No, I don't think so, no." Mr. Johnson says air bubbles were found in child A afterwards. "Did you inject child A with air?" "No." Mr. Johnson asks if Letby was keen to get back to room 1 after this event. Letby says from her experience at Liverpool Women's Hospital, she was taught to get back and carry on as soon as possible. Letby had been asked what the dangers of air embolus were, and she had not known. "Were you playing daft?" "No, every nurse knows the dangers." Letby said she did not know how an air embolus would progress, but knew the ultimate risk was death. The trial is now resuming after a lunch break. Nicholas Johnson KC says there is one thing he overlooked from the morning's evidence. He asks Lucy Letby why she said blotchiness rather than mottling in part of her police statement. "I think they are interchangeable," Letby tells the court. Asked if staffing levels or mistakes had contributed to the collapse of Child B, Letby says she does not know what caused Child B's collapse. She says she does not recall Child B's father lying on the floor following Child B's collapse. A text message from Letby includes, "Dad was on the floor crying, saying please don't take our baby away when I took him to the mortuary. It's just heartbreaking." Letby says she does not recall that. Letby says in this case she did not want to care for Child B so soon after the death of Child A, as unlike the Liverpool example, she had been taught of getting back on the horse, Mr. Johnson's words, and being back in nursery room 1. This was with the same family. Letby accepts Child B did well on the day shift of June 9th. Letby is asked if Child B's parents stood guard in the unit following the death of twin Child A. Letby: "They were very much present on the unit and we allowed for that." A diagram for the night shift of June 9th 10th shows Letby was in nursery room 3 for that night shift, looking after 2 babies. Child B was in room 1. Letby says she got on well with all her nursing colleagues. Letby recalls evidence from court by a nurse colleague on March 21st, in which Letby had said working in nurseries 3 and 4 was, quote, "boring." Letby tells the court, "I have never been bored at work. I would never describe my work as boring." Mr. Johnson goes through the timeline of Child B's events. A message from Letby to Yvonne Griffiths said, quote, "hard coming in and seeing the parents." Mr. Johnson says she is engaged in chit-chat with a friend between 8:41 to 9:10 p.m. on the night shift in a social context. Letby says that sort of conversation was not limited to just her. Mr. Johnson says further messages are exchanged between 9:12 to 9:32 p.m. Letby says all members of staff use their phones on the unit. She says it was accepted. She says she cannot comment for the whole unit, but her designated babies were being cared for. She says she does not believe there were staffing issues. "I can't see what's going on with the other babies at this time," she said. Further messages are exchanged involving Letby, some in a social context, up to 10:28 p.m. Mr. Johnson says in the middle of the block of messages, Letby signs for medication for a baby at 10:20 p.m. Letby says she didn't use her phone in clinical areas. A further block of messages are exchanged on Letby's phone between 10:38 to 10:59 p.m. Nicholas Johnson. Were you bored? Letby. No. Nicholas Johnson. As a matter of fact, do you text a lot when in room 3? Letby. I text regardless of where I am on shift. Nicholas Johnson. Even with an ITU baby in room 1? Letby. Yes, and I think everyone else would say the same if they were honest. Letby says she was working in nursery 1 at points during the shift. She accepts that following child B's collapse, she was in room 1. A document for a TPN bag and lipid administration is signed by Letby at 11:40 p.m. on June 9th. Letby says an observation form at what appears to be 10 past midnight has what Letby accepts could be her handwriting. It is similar to the writing in the next column, which is initialed by Letby. A blood gas record is shown for 12:16 a.m. Letby accepts she is there at that time as 2 nurses are needed to carry out the test. Letby says she was unsure whether she or a colleague had alerted the other to child B's deterioration. Letby. I can't sit here and say definitively which way now. No. Nicholas Johnson. You injected child B with air, didn't you? Letby. No, I didn't. Mr. Johnson asks about child B's appearance. Letby had earlier told her defence child B became quite mottled, dark all over. Letby was asked if she had seen that mottling before. Yes, it was like general mottling that we do see on babies, adding, it was not unusual, but it was a concern, in light of child A's decline the night before. Letby tells the court the mottling was more pronounced than usually found. In police interview, Letby had said the mottling was more than seen on child A, who was pale centrally. It was darker. Letby also said there was a rash appearance. Letby tells the court it was a more pronounced mottling, but was still mottling. Nicholas Johnson. Are you saying this was normal? Letby says it was not normal, but something which would be seen. It was more pronounced than general mottling. She says it came very quickly, and in the context of child A, everyone acted very quickly. Mr. Johnson asks why a doctor asked for someone to get a camera. Letby. In view of what had happened to child A the night before, we did not want to take any chances. Child B's mother describes the mottling event, and the consultant had, quote, never seen this before, and the mother was surprised at this. Do you accept what child A and B's mother said? Letby. I accept there was mottling, yes. She says she does not recall a consultant saying that. She was not there when it was said. Letby tells the court she went immediately to get a camera, and when she returned, the mottling had gone. A doctor had said child B was a very pale, dusky colour, and then developing widespread blotches, patches of purpley red colour. Letby said she was not there at that point, as she may have been getting the camera. She says she did not see that on child B. She says no conversation was ever had about that. The judge asked if there was anything that could have led to the doctor to be mistaken in her description. Letby replies, no, I just saw mottling. Letby says the mottling was purpley red. Another doctor had described a blotchiness to one side. Letby says she did not take over care of child B from a senior nurse of 20 years' experience. She says the senior nurse was busy with the family. The court is shown Letby is a co-signer for a number of medications following child B's collapse with the senior nurse. Letby denies suggesting antiphospholipid syndrome was a cause of child B's death. Mr. Johnson asks if Letby accepts child A and child B had air administered. Letby replies, no. Mr. Johnson turns to the case of child C. Letby is asked to look at her defence statement. Letby recalls she did not believe she was in room 1 and cannot recall how she ended up in room 1. Possibly it was a result of child C's alarm going off. Letby, in her statement, said she had been involved in speaking to the family afterwards, but not to the extent child C's mother had said. Mr. Johnson said a nurse had given evidence to say Letby had to be removed from the family room after child C died. Mr. Johnson says Letby's vague recollection of events is untrue. Letby, I don't agree with that. Nicholas Johnson, I'm going to suggest you enjoyed what happened, and that is why you were in the family room. Letby: no. Letby is asked why she did not remember child C in police interview. Letby says she remembered once provided with further details. She adds, "I don't know how child C died." She rules out staffing levels, medical incompetencies, or someone making a mistake. Mr. Johnson says this is a case where one of the nursing notes by Yvonne Griffiths was misfiled to a different baby, and was, after child C died, refiled back to child C. Mr. Johnson asks Letby if nursing notes time-stamped by their start and end are editable. Letby replies, no. The court hears because of this the note had to be re-entered into the system. The rewritten note is shown to the court. The note is for the June 12th day shift. It includes no apneas noted and caffeine given as prescribed. Long line inserted by Dr. Beach on second attempt. Child C, unsettled at times, soothes with pacifier and enjoyed kangaroo skin-to-skin care with parents. A nursing note by Joanne Williams is shown to the court for Child C on the day shift. Child C very unsettled and fractious. Child C taken off CPAP while out having skin-to-skin with mummy. Calm down straight away with mummy. Letby agrees this was a positive picture for Child C. Child C was on CPAP breathing support to 10 AM, then was taken off it for a couple of hours, then was on Optiflow breathing support for the rest of his life. Mr. Johnson moves on to the shift in which Letby was present. A shift rota is shown to the court, showing Letby was looking after 2 babies that night on June 13th. She was in nursery room 3, with Child C in room 1 that night. Mr. Johnson says this was another shift when Letby had migrated to room 1. Letby replies, yes, in response to Child C's care needs. She says she has no recollection of going to see Child C prior to his collapse. Letby says she was unhappy at being in room 3 for that shift, as opposed to room 1, but that was the decision of the prior shift leader. Letby's nursing colleague had said Letby's designated baby in room 3 needed attention, after Letby had asked if she could be redeployed to room 1 that night. Letby replies, yes, they did need attention and I gave them attention. Letby had sent a message to Jennifer Jones Key, quote, I just keep thinking about Monday, feel I need to be in room 1 to overcome it, but colleagues said no. Jennifer Jones Key, I agree with her, don't think it will help. You need a break from full-on ITU. You have to let it go or it will eat you up. I know not easy and will take time. Lucy Letby. Not the vented baby necessarily. I just feel I need to be in 1 to get the image out of my head. Mella said the same and colleague let her go. Being in 3 is eating me up. All I can see is him in 1. It probably sounds odd, but it's how I feel. Jennifer Jones Key. Well, it's up to you, but don't think it's going to help. It sounds very odd and I would be complete opposite. Can understand colleague trying to look after you. Lucy Letby. Well, that's how I feel. From when I've experienced it at Women's, I've needed to go straight back and have a sick baby, otherwise the image of the one you lost never goes. Why send Mel in if she's trying to look after us? She was in bits over it. Don't expect people to understand, but I know how I feel and how I've dealt with it before. I've voiced that, so can't do any more, but people should respect that. Jennifer Jones Key. Okay. Jennifer Jones Key. I think they do respect it, but also trying to help you. Why don't you go in 1 for a bit? Lucy Letby. Yeah, I've done a couple of meds in 1. I'll be fine. Jennifer Jones Key. It didn't sound like you would be. Sorry, was eating my tea. Lucy Letby. Forget I said anything. I'll be fine. It's part of the job. Just don't feel like there's much team spirit tonight. Jennifer Jones Key. I'm not going to forget, but just think you're way too hard on yourself. It is part of the job, but the worst part. But I do believe it makes us stronger people. Lucy Letby. Unfortunately, I've seen my fair share at Women's, so you're supported differently, and here, it's like people want to tell you how to think and feel. Anyway, onwards and upwards. Just a shame I'm on with Mel, and colleague. Sophie in 1, so haven't got her to talk to either. Jennifer Jones Key. Work is work. A lot of the girls say Women's don't support and tell them to get on with it. I think they don't mean to tell you though, and we're over-caring sometimes. Yeah, that's not good, but you got Liz. Lucy Letby. Women's can be awful, but I learnt the hard way that you have to speak up to get support. I lost a baby one day, and a few hours later was given another dying baby just born in the same cot space. Girls there said it was important to overcome the image. It was awful, but by the end of the day, I realised they were right. It's just different here. Anyway, forget it. I can only talk about it properly to those who knew him, and Mel not interested, so I'll overcome it myself. You get some sleep. Letby accepts there were 2 babies in room 1, but does not accept she was specifically wanting to look after child C. Letby tells the court, "It wasn't about me wanting to get my own way." Letby accepts she was upset, just generally, that her feelings weren't being considered by a colleague and Melanie Taylor. Mr. Johnson interjects and asks if this was the Melanie Taylor who Letby had said potentially caused a child's death. Letby replies, "Potentially, yes." Jennifer Jones Key. "That's a bit mean, isn't it? Don't have to know him to understand. We've all been there. Yep, off to bed now." Lucy Letby. "I don't mean it like that, just only those who saw him know what image I have in my head. Forget it, I'm obviously making more of it than I should." Letby tells the court she had hoped Jennifer Jones Key would have been more understanding to how she was feeling, and was frustrated, and the conversation was not going anywhere, so she wanted to leave the conversation. Letby says her colleague Sophie Ellis was the least experienced member of staff on that shift and did not have the skills for the job of looking after small premature babies in room 1. "I did not think she was qualified for the job. She did not have the skills for premature babies in room 1. She denies that Sophie Ellis did anything to cause child C's collapse. Mr. Johnson asks, "She had something you wanted?" Letby replied, "No." The court hears Sophie Ellis's statement saying when she entered room 1, Letby was by child C's cot side saying, quote, "He's just dropped, his heart rate saturations," or words to that effect. The court is shown a neonatal schedule for the night shift of June 13th-14th, 2015. Letby is shown recording observations for her designated babies and made medication prescriptions for babies not in room 1. Letby says the medications for those babies would have been drawn up in room 1. Quote, "They could not have been done in a special care nursery." Letby says if Sophie Ellis has documented correctly, there would have been no air in child C's stomach after an aspiration was made for the baby's feed. Letby denies taking, in Mr. Johnson's words, an opportunity to sabotage child C. In police interview, it is put to Letby that child C collapsed 6 minutes after she sent the last of her text messages. Letby states, "I don't recall where I was at the time." Letby says she may have been in a nursing station before going into room 1. Letby said she did not recall being cotside, but accepted Sophie Ellis's account at the time it was put to her by the police. The death of child C was very memorable, wasn't it? Yes. So this concludes the first 2 days of the cross-examination in court of the nurse Lucy Letby. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy this content, please don't forget to click the subscribe button down below and also give the video a thumbs up before you leave. As always, many thanks for joining me for this particular video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.